In a small African village nestled between rolling green hills and golden fields, a woman named Mama Sod gave birth to twin boys. The entire village gathered to celebrate. The arrival of twins was considered a sign of great fortune. The village elder, Elder Mosi, blessed them, saying, "These two will either stand as brothers or fall as rivals. May the spirits guide them." The twins were named Jabori and Keto. From the moment they opened their eyes, it was clear that they looked exactly alike. Both had deep brown skin, dark curly hair, and sharp, intelligent eyes. But while their faces mirrored each other, their personalities could not have been more different. Jabori was bold and fearless, the kind of child who ran ahead on the path, climbed trees without fear, and laughed the loudest. He was strong and full of life, with a natural ability to draw people to him. Keto, on the other hand, was quiet and observant. He rarely spoke unless necessary and preferred the comfort of silence and shadows. While Jabori led the village children in games and races, Keto watched from afar, never joining in. He was thoughtful and sensitive, but his quiet nature often made him invisible in the eyes of others. Their mother, Mama Sod, was a strong-willed woman who had worked hard all her life. She adored Jabori, calling him the lion of our family. "You are born to be great," she would say, wrapping him in her arms and planting kisses on his forehead. But when it came to Keto, her attitude was different. She did not mistreat him, but she did not celebrate him either. "Why are you always so quiet?" she would ask with a sigh. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Keto never knew how to answer. No matter what he did, it was never enough. He longed for his mother's approval, but her heart had already chosen Jabori. Their father had died when they were young, so the only role model they had was Elder Mosi, their wise grandfather. He was the only one who noticed Keto's pain. "Do not envy your brother, Keto," he said one evening, sitting with the boy under the old baobab tree. "You have a different strength, one the world may not see yet. But remember, jealousy is like a fire in dry grass. If left unchecked, it will burn everything, including yourself." Keto nodded, but his heart was already beginning to harden. As the twins grew, so did the gap between them. Jabori became the village hero, winning races, hunting with the elders, and being the pride of their mother. When he spoke, people listened. When he laughed, people joined in. Keto faded further into the background. In school, teachers praised Jabori, calling him the future of the village. Keto's achievements went unnoticed. During harvest festivals, Jabori danced at the center of the crowd, while Keto sat in the shadows. Even in their own home, Jabori got the biggest piece of meat at dinner, while Keto got whatever was left. It wasn't that Jabori was cruel. He loved his brother, but he never truly saw his pain. He never noticed the way Keto clenched his fist when their mother praised only one son. The resentment inside Keto grew, slowly, like a small ember waiting for the right wind to turn it into a raging fire. And then, everything changed when they met Amora Point one day. A new family arrived in the village. Their daughter, Amora, was known for her beauty and intelligence. She had sharp, curious eyes and a smile that could stop time. She was kind and wise beyond her years, with a heart that sought to understand everyone. The moment Keto saw her, he felt something he had never felt before: hope. For the first time, he wanted something for himself. But before he could even speak to her, he saw something that made his heart sink. Jabori was already laughing with her. And just like that, Keto realized that he was losing again. Losing to the golden sun. That night, Keto lay awake, staring at the thatched roof of their hut. For the first time, he wished Jabori did not exist. And though he didn't know it yet, that dark thought would one day grow into a deadly reality. The village of Nshona was alive with the sounds of drums and laughter as the harvest festival approached. Children ran through the fields, elders prepared for the ceremonies, and young men and women dressed in their finest attire, hoping to catch the attention of a future spouse. Among them was Amora, the girl who had unknowingly stolen the hearts of both twins. Amora was unlike any other woman in the village. She was curious and sharp-witted, asking questions that made elders pause before answering. She could match any man in a debate and yet remained graceful and kind. She had come from another village with her family, and her arrival had sparked excitement and admiration. From the moment Keto laid eyes on her, he had felt something deep inside him stir, a new desire, not for power or recognition, but for love. But there was a problem. Jabari had already reached her first. Keto watched as Jabari charmed Amora with his confidence and easy laughter. She laughed at his jokes. She listened intently to his stories. She walked beside him during the evening village gatherings. And Keto felt invisible once again. For weeks, Keto tried to talk to Amora, but every time he approached, Jabari was already there, his presence like a towering tree blocking out the sun. One evening, while sitting by the riverbank, Keto finally gathered the courage to speak. "Amora," he said hesitantly. She turned, her warm brown eyes meeting his. "Yes, Keto." His heart pounded. He wanted to tell her everything, how he admired her mind, how he noticed the way she tilted her head when she was deep in thought, how he longed for her attention the way others long for gold. But before he could speak, Jabari appeared, laughing as he approached. "There you are, Amora." "I was looking for you," Jabari said, sitting down beside her without hesitation. Amora smiled, her focus shifting to Jabari. Keto clenched his fist. It was happening again. Jabari wasn't stealing her on purpose, but he didn't have to. He always won without trying, while Keto was left to fade into the background. Days turned into weeks, and Keto's jealousy grew. One afternoon, while repairing fishing nets with the village men, Keto overheard something that made his chest tighten. Jabari had proposed to Amora. And she had said yes. A loud ringing filled Keto's ears. His hands trembled. He had lost again. That evening, Keto walked through the village in a daze, his mind a battlefield of rage, sadness, and disbelief. How was this fair? Had he not loved her first? Had he not deserved a chance? As he passed by his mother's hut, he heard her voice inside, full of joy and pride. "My son is marrying the finest girl in the village," she said happily to the neighbors. "Jabari is truly blessed." Keto stopped in his tracks. There it was again. That invisible wall separating them. Jabari was blessed. Keto was forgotten. A small voice whispered in Keto's mind. "You were never meant to win." For the first time in his life, Keto started to believe that if he wanted something, he would have to take it. And in that moment, his heart darkened, the wedding preparations began, and the village celebrated Jabari's upcoming marriage. Women wove colorful fabrics, hunters gathered the finest meats, and elders prepared sacred blessings. But Keto was not celebrating. Instead, he was watching. Observing. Planning. One night, as he lay awake in his small hut, staring at the woven roof above him, an idea began to take shape. What if Jabari was gone? What if he could take Jabari's place? They looked exactly the same, who would know the difference? At first, the thought terrified him. But then, a cold calmness settled over him. Yes. If Jabari disappeared, Keto could finally step into the life he always wanted. A life where he was the one loved. A life where he was the one chosen. And no one would ever know the truth. As the drums of the wedding night grew closer, so did Keto's decision. One way or another, he would not be left behind this time. The village of Nshona was alive with celebration. Drums echoed through the hills, the scent of roasted meats filled the air, and the women sang traditional songs as they prepared for the biggest event of the year, Jabari and Amora's wedding. The entire village had gathered to witness the union of the golden son and the beloved daughter. But in the shadows, Keto was watching. His heart pounded as he saw Jabari laughing with his friends, carefree and happy, completely unaware that his own brother was planning to betray him. This should have been my wedding. My life. The thought burned in Keto's mind like a fire that refused to die. He had already made up his mind. Tonight, he would change his fate. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the ceremony began. Jabari stood proudly before the elders, dressed in a beautifully woven agbada, his eyes filled with pure joy as he watched Amora approach. She was breathtaking, draped in a golden wrapper, her hair adorned with delicate beads that shimmered under the torchlight. Keto watched as the elders blessed their union, chanting prayers of prosperity and love. The entire village cheered. Except Keto. He clapped along with the others, but inside, his rage was at its peak. How dare Jabari have everything? How dare fate choose him? How dare Amora smile at him like that? Keto clenched his fist. Tonight, Jabari would disappear forever. Late into the night, after the festivities had settled, Keto approached Jabari's hut. Jabari, still glowing from the evening, grinned when he saw his brother. "Oh, Keto. Finally coming to congratulate me," he joked, wrapping an arm around him. Keto forced a smile. "Of course, brother. But first, come with me. There's something I must show you." Jabari frowned. "Now? Can't it wait until morning?" Keto shook his head. "It's important." Jabari sighed but followed. "All right then, lead the way." Keto led him towards the darkness of the forest, away from the village, away from the laughter, away from witnesses. The wind howled between the trees. Jabari, unaware of the danger, walked beside his brother, trusting him completely. When they reached the clearing, Keto stopped. "This is far enough," Jabari said. "What is it?" For a moment, Keto hesitated. This was his brother. The same brother he had grown up with. The same brother who had once protected him from bullies as a child. But then, he thought of Amora. He thought of the years of living in Jabari's shadow. He thought of his mother's favoritism. And his rage took over. Before Jabari could react, Keto struck him on the head with a heavy branch. Jabari stumbled, clutching his head in shock. "Keto, what are you doing?" He turned, trying to defend himself, but Keto hit him again. And again. And again. Until Jabari collapsed onto the forest floor, his body motionless. Keto stood over him, panting, his hands shaking. For a moment, he stared at what he had done. His brother, his twin, was dead. But there was no turning back now. With trembling hands, Keto dragged Jabari's body into a shallow ditch, covering him with dirt and leaves. The sound of the night creatures surrounded him, the only witnesses to his terrible crime. When it was done, Keto took Jabari's clothes, his ring, his necklace. He wiped the blood from his hands. Then, he walked back to the village. As Jabari thought as Keto entered the hut where Amora waited, his heart raced. She was sitting by the bed, smiling softly, unaware that the man she had just married was no longer Jabari. Keto swallowed his fear. If he was going to take his brother's place, he had to become him. He smiled at Amora the way Jabari would. He spoke like him, walked like him, breathed like him. And she didn't suspect a thing. As Keto lay beside her that night, he stared at the ceiling, feeling a mix of victory and dread. He had done it. He was finally the chosen one. But deep down, a dark whisper crept into his mind. You may have stolen his life, but can you truly live it? For the first time, fear crept into Keto's heart. But it was too late to turn back now. The village of Nshona awoke to a new dawn, unaware that a dark secret lay buried beneath the forest floor. To the world, Jabari was alive and well, celebrating his first morning as a married man. But the truth was far more sinister. Keto had stolen his brother's life. And now, he had to become him. Keto sat beside Amora, watching as she prepared breakfast. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her voice warm and full of love. Keto hesitated. The way she looked at him, with trust, with devotion, it made his chest tighten. This was what he had wanted. Yet, for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. "Yes," he said, forcing a smile. But Amora frowned slightly. "You seem different." Keto tensed. "Different how?" She studied him for a moment, then shook her head. "Never mind. It's probably just me." She smiled again and returned to her cooking, humming softly. Keto exhaled. He had been Jabari's shadow for so long, he knew exactly how to mimic him. The way Jabari walked, the way he laughed, even the way he spoke to the village elders, Keto imitated everything perfectly. For now, no one suspected a thing. But he had underestimated one person. A few days after the wedding, Elder Mosi visited Keto. He found him sitting under the baobab tree, staring at the horizon. "You seem troubled, my son," Elder Mosi said, sitting beside him. Keto forced a smile. "Not at all. I have everything I ever wanted." Elder Mosi's eyes were sharp. "And yet, something is missing in you." Keto stiffened. "What do you mean?" The old man sighed. "I have known you since the day you were born. And I have known your brother just as well. The boy before me is not the same Jabari I blessed on his wedding night." A chill ran down Keto's spine. Had he made a mistake? Had he exposed himself without realizing it? He forced a laugh. "Marriage changes a man, Elder. Perhaps that is what you see." Elder Mosi studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Perhaps," he said. But the doubt in his eyes remained. As the days passed, Amora also began noticing strange things. At first, they were small details. He forgot the stories they used to share. He no longer called her by the special nickname Jabari had given her. He hesitated before answering questions he should have known instantly. One evening, as they sat together, Amora decided to test him. She held out a small wooden bracelet. "Do you remember this?" Keto took it, staring at it blankly. "It's a gift I gave you," he guessed. Amora's heart sank. Jabari had carved this bracelet himself when they first met. The real Jabari would have never forgotten. She forced a smile. "Yes, of course." But deep inside, her doubt had turned into fear. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Late one night, Keto awoke in a cold sweat. His heart was racing, his chest heaving. He had dreamt of Jabari. In the dream, Jabari stood before him, his body covered in dirt, his eyes full of rage. "Did you think you could take my life?" the ghostly figure whispered. Keto gasped, backing away. "No, you're dead." Jabari smiled darkly. "Then why am I still here?" The air grew heavy, the darkness around him thickened. Keto clutched his head. "Go away." He jerked awake, his hands trembling. It had just been a dream. But the guilt was beginning to eat away at him. He turned and saw Amora staring at him. "Keto," she whispered. His blood turned to ice. Had she called him Keto? She had never mistaken his name before. But before he could react, she closed her eyes again, pretending to be asleep. And in that moment, Keto knew. She was beginning to suspect the truth. The days dragged on, each one more suffocating than the last. Keto had won. He had Jabari's life, his wife, and his name. But he couldn't escape the weight of his crime. Every shadow looked like Jabari watching him. Every whisper in the village sounded like a secret being uncovered. And the one person who could destroy his lie, Amora, was watching him more closely than ever. You may have stolen his life, but can you truly live it? The whisper of his own guilt haunted him. And deep down, he knew his time was running out. Because the truth always finds its way to the surface, even when buried beneath the forest floor. The village of Nshona had always been a peaceful place, where everyone knew each other's names, where stories were passed down like sacred heirlooms, and where the truth was impossible to hide for long. And now, Keto's secret was starting to crack. It had been weeks since Jabari's disappearance, and though Keto had successfully taken his brother's place, he could feel the walls closing in. Everywhere he turned, eyes lingered on him a little too long. Every conversation felt like a trap, waiting to spring. And worst of all, Amara was watching him. She had once gazed at him with love. Now, she looked at him with suspicion. And Keto knew it was only a matter of time before she uncovered the truth. It started with small things. One afternoon, while preparing a meal, Amara asked, "Do you remember the day we first met?" Keto froze for half a second. He knew the story, but he couldn't recall the exact words Jabari had used when telling it before. Of course," he said. "You were wearing a blue dress, and I helped you carry a basket of yams." Amara nodded slowly. "Yes. But you told me before that you remembered the red beads I wore in my hair that day. You said you had never seen anything more beautiful." Keto's stomach dropped. He didn't know how to respond. He forced a smile. "Oh, I must have forgotten." But Amara didn't smile back. Because Jabari never forgot anything about her. That night, as she lay beside him, her heart pounded in her chest. "Something is wrong." A few days later, while cleaning the hut, Amara found something unexpected. Tucked away inside an old wooden chest, she found a crumpled letter, one that had never been sent. It was written in Keto's handwriting. Her hands shook as she read. "Amara, I do not know if you will ever read this, but I must speak my heart. I have loved you from the moment I saw you. I have watched you from afar, hoping you would see me. But you only have eyes for my brother. Why is it always Jabari? Why must I always be the forgotten one? The one who fades into the background? I cannot bear this any longer. I wish things were different. I wish he were gone." Amora's breath caught in her throat. Keto had written this letter before the wedding. Before Jabari disappeared. Her mind raced. Why had Keto never given this to her? And why did Jabari feel so different now? Unless... Her hands trembled as she whispered the terrifying thought out loud. Unless this isn't Jabari at all. Amora didn't confront Keto immediately. Instead, she decided to watch him more closely. She tested him with memories only the real Jabari would know, and each time, he stumbled. She saw the fear flicker in his eyes when she mentioned things from their past. And she noticed something even more chilling: he avoided talking about Jabari's childhood altogether. One evening, she sat beside Elder Mosi and whispered, "Elder, I fear something terrible has happened." The wise man studied her. "You have seen it too, haven't you?" Amora's breath caught. You knew?" Elder Mosi nodded. "I have watched him closely. That is not the boy I raised. His spirit is restless. His words do not match his past. I have held my tongue, but the ancestors whisper to me, a great wrong has been committed." Amora's voice trembled. "What do we do?" Elder Mosi placed a hand on hers. "We find the truth. And then, we bring it into the light." One night, while Keto was asleep, Amora made a decision. She would go to the forest. Something inside her told her that the answers were buried there. She waited until the village was asleep, then grabbed a torch and made her way through the dark trees, following a feeling she couldn't explain. And then, she saw it. A patch of disturbed earth. Her heart pounded. She began to dig. And then, her hands hit something solid. A piece of fabric. A familiar fabric. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she pulled it free, and the world spun around her. It was Jabari's robe. Stained with blood. Amora fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. There was no doubt anymore. Jabari was dead. And Keto had taken his place. The next morning, Amora did something she never thought she would have to do. She went to the village elders. She told them everything, the letter, the inconsistencies, the discovery in the forest. The elders listened in silence, their faces grim. Finally, Elder Mosi spoke. It is time to confront the truth. The entire village gathered in the center of Nshona. Keto was called before the elders, standing tall, though his hands were trembling. Amora stepped forward. She held up Jabari's blood-stained robe. "Where is my husband?" she demanded, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. Keto's breath hitched. He could not lie anymore. The weight of his deception, the whispers of the ancestors, the eyes of the village staring into his soul, it was too much. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground. And in a voice barely above a whisper, he said the words that sealed his fate. "Jabari is dead, and I am the one who killed him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mama Sod collapsed in grief, wailing, "My son. My sons." Elder Mosi closed his eyes, shaking his head in sorrow. And Amora, the woman Keto had done all this for, looked at him with nothing but disgust and pain. The village had its answer. But Keto's punishment had yet to come. The village of Nshona had never known a silence like this. Keto knelt on the ground, his hands shaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jabari is dead, and I am the one who killed him." The words hung in the air, suffocating and heavy. Mama Sod let out a wail so deep and sorrowful that even the birds in the trees went silent. Elder Mosi closed his eyes and bowed his head. The spirits had whispered of a great wrong, and now the truth had finally surfaced. The villagers stared at Keto in horror. Jabari, their golden son, the man they had loved and celebrated, was gone. And the one responsible was his own twin. Mama Sod pushed through the crowd and collapsed in front of Keto. Her face was wet with tears, her hands trembling as she grabbed his arms. "My son," she sobbed. "My own son did this." Keto couldn't look at her. She shook him. "Why, Keto? Why would you do this to your own blood?" His lips trembled, but he had no words. What could he say? That he had been jealous? That he had wanted everything Jabari had? That he had hated being invisible? Nothing could undo what he had done. And for the first time, he wished he could take it all back. The elders whispered among themselves. The entire village waited. Then, Elder Mosi stood before them, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Keto," he said, "you have committed the most unforgivable betrayal. You have taken the life of your brother, a man who loved you, who trusted you. You have deceived your wife, your family, and your people. For this, you must face justice." The villagers murmured, their faces filled with anger and grief. Some called for banishment. Others whispered about death as punishment. But Elder Mosi raised his hand for silence. "Keto," he said, his voice firm, "you will be taken to the chief's court, where your fate will be decided. Until then, you will be kept under guard." Two strong warriors stepped forward and grabbed Keto's arms. He did not fight them. For the first time in his life, he accepted his fate. As they led him away, Amora stepped forward. She was not crying. She was not screaming. Her eyes were hard as stone. "You stole my husband from me," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. Keto swallowed. "I love Jabari," she continued. "And you thought you could take his place. Did you really think love could be stolen?" Keto dropped his gaze. He had been a fool. Amora took a deep breath, steadying herself. I do not hate you, Keto. I do not wish for revenge. But I will never forgive you. Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could. The next morning, Keto was brought before the village chief's court, where the highest elders gathered. They listened to the full story. They heard of his jealousy, his crime, and his betrayal. Finally, the chief spoke. Keto, he said, his voice filled with deep disappointment, you have taken the life of your own brother. You have caused pain beyond measure. You do not deserve to walk freely among your people. Keto closed his eyes, bracing for the worst. You shall be banished from Shona for the rest of your days. You will live alone, a man without a home, without a name, without a family. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Banishment was worse than death. A man cast out would never belong anywhere. That evening, under the watchful eyes of the villagers, Keto was forced to leave. No one spoke to him. No one stopped him. Even his own mother could not bring herself to say goodbye. She had lost both sons in one night, one to death, the other to his own greed. As Keto stepped beyond the borders of the village, he turned back one last time. His childhood home. His people. His mother. Amora. Everything he had ever wanted was gone. And for the rest of his life, he would wander the lands alone, carrying the weight of his crime. The village never forgot Jabari's story. For years to come, elders told it to their children, a warning about the dangers of jealousy and greed. And whenever the name Keto was spoken, it was not in anger, but as a lesson. A lesson that no man could steal love. A lesson that no lie could stay buried forever. And somewhere, far beyond the hills, in the loneliness of exile, Keto carried his shame with him. Until the end of his days, the village of Nshona slowly healed, but the scars left behind by Jabari's mother and Keto's betrayal would never fade completely. For weeks after Keto's banishment, a heavy sadness hung over the village like a dark cloud. The people whispered of the tragedy, the golden son lost too soon, and the brother who had destroyed everything out of envy. But life in Nshona did not stop. The seasons changed. The crops still grew. The sun still rose and set. But for those who had known Jabari and Keto, nothing would ever be the same. Of all those left behind, Mama Sword suffered the most. She had lost both of her sons, one to death and one to his own greed. For years, she had placed all her love and pride in Jabari, while ignoring Keto, pushing him further into the shadows. Had she caused this? Had her favoritism fueled the hatred that had consumed Keto? She spent her days sitting by the river, staring at the water, whispering prayers to the spirits, asking for forgiveness. But the past could not be undone. And the weight of her guilt would never leave her heart. Amora was not the same woman she had been before the tragedy. She had once been full of love and trust, believing in the goodness of people. But Keto's betrayal had shattered something inside her. She left Nshona for a time, traveling to a distant village, where she lived with her relatives. But no matter how far she went, she could not escape the memories. Jabari's laughter still echoed in her mind. His hands, his voice, his warmth, all gone, stolen from her. She could have chosen bitterness. She could have let hatred consume her. But she didn't. Instead, she chose to live. She focused on building a new life, helping others, and ensuring that no one else in the village would suffer the way she had. She told her daughter about Jabari, ensuring his memory lived on. And slowly, very slowly, her heart began to heal. But she never forgot. And she never forgave. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Elder Mosi gathered the children of Nshona beneath the great baobab tree. He looked into their young, curious eyes and spoke the lesson that would be passed down for generations. A man's greatest enemy is not his brother. It is jealousy and greed that turn brother against brother. He pointed to the horizon, where Keto had disappeared into exile long ago. Once, two trees grew side by side. One reached for the sky, while the other remained in its shadow. Instead of finding its own path, the weaker tree became bitter and destroyed the stronger one. But in the end, it withered alone. The children listened in silence, their faces filled with understanding. And so, the story of Jabari and Keto became more than just a tragedy. It became a warning. A lesson that greed and envy destroy more than just the one who carries them. They destroy families. They destroy trust. They destroy everything. As for Keto, no one in Shona ever saw him again. Some believed he had died in the wilderness, alone and full of regret. Others whispered that he had traveled far, taking on a new name, a new life, trying to escape the weight of his past. But no matter where he went, he could never escape himself. The spirits whispered his crime to the wind. And wherever he walked, he carried the curse of his own guilt. For a man who destroys his own blood can never find peace. Not in this life. And not in the next. Years passed. Decades turned into generations. And still, the story of Jabari and Keto was told. By mothers to their sons. By fathers to their daughters. By elders to those who would one day lead the village. And with every telling, the lesson remained clear. Love cannot be stolen. Jealousy is a fire that consumes everything, even the one who carries it. The truth will always rise, no matter how deep it is buried. And so, Jabari's name remained a symbol of honor and love. And Keto's name became a warning of what happens when the heart is ruled by envy. The village of Nshona never forgot. And neither did the world. For some stories live forever.